afternoon. Thanks for joining us. This presentation will cover the IDO 2020 annual update amendments to small areas. And this presentation will be going through each small area, reviewing the changes, the reason for the change, and basically organized in order, area by area. The first one that we'll talk about right now is the downtown area. And the first change to this is a change to the zoning that actually is the mixed use form-based zoning. Right now, it's only mapped in and near downtown. And this change would apply to any other area in the future that also gets a zone change to be mixed use form-based. So starting over here, the change would happen in table 2411 in the MXFB zone district. That's mixed use form-based. The changes to revise table 2411 to add the following as a subline in the setback standard rear minimum line for the zones MXFB ID, FX, and AC. And the change would be to read 0 feet where rear lot line abuts a street or alley. The reason for this change is to reduce the rear setback minimum in the form-based zone districts for the following subzones, MX, FB, ID, FX, and AC, where the rear lot line abuts a street or an alley to 0 feet. This change is consistent with some changes that happened in the 2019 annual update, and they were revised for urban centers, main streets, and premium transit areas. It's also consistent with the requirements in the downtown 2025 sector development plan. There's a little more information in the council services memo, and also city council services did a similar presentation like this, focusing on all the small areas that had amendments that were processed through their office. So check that video out anytime you see that note over here in the explanation column. The next change that applies in or near downtown is in the form-based, in the use standards section. Scrolling to find that. Downtown area. So this next change is to the use-specific standards in the downtown area. It's on page 154 of the IDO, and the subsection is 43B7D. And this is the standard that applies to multifamily residential uses. And the change would read, this use shall require a conditional use approval pursuant to subsection 66A if located on the ground floor of any building in the downtown center in any zone district other than MXFBID or Volcano Heights urban center areas. The reason for the change is that right now there is a small conflict in this regulation, which requires a conditional use approval for residential on the ground floor and a small area zoned MXFBID that's in the downtown center. This area previously had a housing focused zone in downtown 2025 sector development plan and was allowed to have residential uses on the ground floor permissively. So this change would allow anything with that zoning that's in the downtown center to have residential uses on the ground floor permissively. So the next change, this is still on the same page of this spreadsheet. This is a change to section 51C2B2, which is the contextual standards for residential uses. And the change would read, within urban center, main street, premium transit areas, or within 1,320 feet, which is a quarter of a mile of a downtown urban center, main street, or premium transit area, new low density residential development shall be based on the lot size of the Bernalillo County Tax Assessor's lot, and continues from there. What this change does is it extends the allowance for more flexible infill opportunities into more dense areas that would also apply within 1/4 of a mile of the downtown center. The next change that applies to the downtown center, this is 55B2A1. I think this is the one that's shown down here. That would revise the standard to delete the phrase downtown area, which is an area that is basically corresponds to the former sector plan, and replace it with the words downtown center. So downtown center is an area that's slightly smaller and it's mapped by the comprehensive plan. And so what this change does is it makes off-street parking exemption only applicable within the downtown center, which is intended to be the most dense portion of the city. The existing map in the IDO shows the boundary of the downtown 2025 sector plan. And so some blocks from the downtown neighborhood area sector plan, the Huning Castle Reynolds Edition sector plan, and McClellan Park sector plan were included in that previous downtown 2025 sector plan. But they transitioned to more residential character, and those areas are a little bit lower density, and it makes sense to have off-street parking requirements apply for those areas to relieve any pressures on the residential uses in the areas that kind of transition out of the downtown core. This next change is section 512. Says 512E4D, near downtown center. So this section would add a new subsection 1 that reads, near downtown center, rooftop signs are allowed pursuant to subsection 14.16.512 F3A, standards applicable in small areas. This change is an editorial change related to the proposal for other changes to subsection 512F3. There's a little bit more information in the Council Services memo for small areas. This next change right here, it's 512F3, and it's also shown in the slideshow over on the side of the screen. This would add a new subsection called near downtown center to the signage regulations. This would read, rooftop signs are allowed in any mixed use or non-residential zone district in the downtown center or in any mixed use or non-residential zone district within 330 feet of the downtown center. Only 30% of the sign area shall consist of channel letters, channel graphics, open lighting sign elements, or a solid panel. The structural framework of the sign shall be visible for the remaining 70% of the sign area. The reason for this proposed change is that it would allow rooftop signs in and within 330 feet of the downtown center. Historically, rooftop signs were located in the downtown core and also along Central Avenue on some of the commercial buildings. This allowance was added in 2019 update to the IDO. It only applied to the east downtown area. So this is expanding it all the way to the downtown core. This next set of changes are related to the downtown neighborhood area. So the first change we're going to look at is on page 79 of the IDO, and the section is 34D5A1. The change would be to revise subsection B to move the second sentence to be a new subsection D and add a new subsection C as follows. A garage door facing the street shall be set back a minimum of an additional 5 feet beyond the horizontal plane of the front facade, which includes a porch facade. What this change does is it carries forward a regulation that was adopted in the downtown neighborhood area sector development plan. This was first submitted with the 2019 annual update, which was originally a legislative action, but was resubmitted this year with notice to the property owners to let everyone who is in that neighborhood know that this change is happening and will apply to their property. The next change is also to the same section. It's in the 34D5A1A, and that change reads: the minimum rear yard setback for attached or detached garages off an alley is 5 feet. This change carries forward regulation that was adopted in the downtown neighborhood area sector development plan. This was also first submitted in 2019 annual update, which was a legislative action, but this year it was resubmitted with notice to every property owner in that small area. The next set of changes apply to the East Downtown CPO 4. This is showing up in the IDO on page 83, and the section references 34E5A3. This would be to add a new subsection B, shown over here in red, to read: parking structures. This is not matching up. Oh, okay, so this starts out with reading the whole three. It's talking about parking structures, and it says they shall have uses from table 421 on the ground floor along at least 50% of the street-facing facade of the parking structure. Where ground floor uses aren't provided, opaque walls at least 3 feet high or vegetative screens at least 3 feet high at the time of planting shall be provided. The new text would read: walls provided pursuant to subsection A above may be part of the structure of the building or may be a separate wall constructed between the building and the sidewalk. And this change would add consistency with some other changes made to parking requirements in the IDO HPO, which is the Historic Protection Overlay, as part of this 2020 annual update. And in some of the sector plans, we have kind of a side-by-side here. This is a screenshot of the former sector plan text showing how it's carried forward into the IDO. This next change is to the East Downtown Historic Protection Overlay. This change is found in the IDO on page 270, and it is section 55F4A3. And the change is to revise the text as follows: parking structures shall have uses from table 421 on the ground floor along at least 50% of the street-facing facade of the parking structure. Where ground floor uses aren't provided, opaque walls at least 3 feet high or vegetative screens at least 3 feet high at the time of planting shall be provided. Walls provided pursuant to subsection A above may be part of the structure of the building or may be a separate wall constructed between the building and the sidewalk. The reason for the change is to add consistency with other changes made to parking requirements in the IDO CPO that happened with the 2019 annual update and as part of the 2020 annual update. We just covered the related change. Last year, this new text was added to 3 and 3A, and this year, the same text is added to the HPO. And part of the reason is that we want the HPO and the CPO to be consistent, and so the regulations should be matching each other. This next change is to the Nob Hill Highland CPO 8. This falls on page 98 of the IDO, and it's subsection 34I5B4B. And the text would be revised as follows: be built to function or appear as a storefront or urban residential building frontage type. So this is a regulation shown over here that's about facade design. And what the change does is it clarifies what a residential facade is, and it links the regulation to a defined term. You'll see over here in the former Nob Hill Highland sector plan, it just said residential facade, and that's what the IDO used to say, but that's not a defined term. So we're revising it to say urban residential building frontage type, which is a defined term. It's a group under building frontage types for urban residential. So this this connects the regulation to a defined term, which helps us regulate things more consistently. Next change is to the uptown area. The first one here is on page 193 of the IDO. It's section 4.3 F4E9. It applies to the uptown urban center, and this regulation would for drive-through and drive-up facilities will be revised as follows. This use is prohibited in the following mapped area, which includes all of the uptown urban center as mapped in the ABC comp plan as amended, unless accessory to a use other than a restaurant or located within 1,320 feet, which is 1/4 of a mile, in any direction of the right-of-way of Interstate 40. The reason for the change is to allow drive-through and drive-up facilities that are accessory to a restaurant within uptown area if it's located within 1/4 of a mile of the public right-of-way of I-40. The development standards for drive-throughs and drive-up facility design in subsection 5.5 I-2 would still apply to minimize potential conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles. This is really important because the uptown urban center is intended to be one of the most dense and intense developed areas in our city. This is a change. There's more information about this in the council services memo, and there's another presentation given by a council services staff that explains this in more detail. This next change is the Los Terranes CPO 6. So there's two changes proposed in the Los Terranes area. They're both shown on the IDO on page 90. The first one is section 34G E3A1B. And that's shown over here. It's related to front setbacks. And the change would read, in new development of 5 or more single family and or 2 family detached dwellings, front setbacks shall be within 5 feet of the front setback of one existing single family or 2 family detached dwelling located on an abutting lot facing the same street as the subject property. The reason for this change is to clarify both options in the standard should apply to single family homes and duplexes. As it's currently written, a new subdivision of 5 or more duplexes would not have any applicable front setback rules. Second change is shown down here. It is to section 34G4B, and the text would be revised to read, building height maximum, 35 feet for buildings located more than 450 feet from the right-of-way of Interstate Highway 40. And the change clarifies that we would measure that distance, the 450-foot distance from the edge of the I-40 right-of-way. But some other regulations might measure from the nearest through lane, or other locations on some roads are measured from the center line of a road. And so this clarifies exactly where we would take that measurement from. This next change is to the Rio Grande Boulevard CPO 11. It's on page 105 of the IDO, section 34L3, and the text would be revised to read as follows. Setback from the right-of-way of Rio Grande Boulevard between Indian School Road and Montaño Road, minimum 25 feet in the RA zone and 20 feet in all other zones. What this does is it revises the standard to be consistent with the Rio Grande Corridor Plan to apply only to the setback from the road into the property. And it makes it the regulatory language more parallel with Coors Boulevard CPO2. This was first submitted with the 2019 annual update, which was a legislative action, but needed to be resubmitted this year with 2020 so that we could provide notice to every property owner. Second change is shown down here. This is to a parking standard. It is subsection 3 or L5B3. And what the change would do is it would replace the word non-residential development with mixed use or non-residential development. And the reason for the change is so that we can maintain the intent of the original regulation from the corridor plan that mixed use development is allowed and the standard would apply. And so parking would be required to be on the side or behind of both a mixed use or a fully non-residential development. This change was also first submitted last year and resubmitted so that we could notice every private property owner. The next change is to the Sawmill Wells Park area. This is CPO 12. The first change we have here is to subsection 34M5B8, and it would be revised to read street-facing facades over 35 feet long must be designed to appear as a collection of smaller buildings. So that's shown right here. And what this does is this applies the standard to all residential development based on the subsection title. It eliminates the term residential buildings because that's not a defined term in the IDO. We have residential development, residential uses, and residential zones, but not a defined term for residential buildings. This was also first submitted in 2019, but then resubmitted to provide property owner individual mailed notice. The next change that we have to this area is in subsection 34M5C. This would replace the header and text to read as follows: building design for mixed use and non-residential development. And the following regulation would read, in mixed use and non-residential zone districts, the following building design regulations apply. And it continues on with these regulations. The explanation for these changes is to apply building design standards to mixed use development as well as non-residential development. It applies the standards to all zones, not just the zones that are currently existing in the character protection overlay area. What this does is it ensures that even if a property owner gets a zone change to a different mixed use or non-residential zone, the building standards would still apply to any other zone that's not currently mapped. Next changes to the same section, subsection C5. This change would be, section would be revised to read, street-facing facades on buildings in non-residential development on Mountain Road or adjacent to a residential zone district must be designed to appear as a collection of smaller buildings by incorporating variations in massing, building height, or building, just lost my place. Building material at least every 35 feet of the facade length. The reason for this change, it reinstates language from the Sawmill Wells Park Sector Development Plan. It provides options for compliance that are consistent with other building design standards. And this was also first submitted with the 2019 annual update, which was legislative, but it was resubmitted this year to provide notice to property owners. This next change is to the Coors View Protection Overlay Zone. This is probably the most extensive changes that we're proposing this year. So they're shown marked up in the text of the IDO here. And this explanation, it refers you to an exhibit, which is exhibit 36D, Coors Boulevard VPO2. And the content of that exhibit basically tracks with what's shown on the screen over here. The main intent of updating these regulations is to incorporate changes that were proposed in 2019 IDO annual update, and also clarify some issues raised during the EPC review process that we encountered in 2020. Generally, the changes specify what view is protected, the viewpoint that view is taken from, define terms, and more specific methodology about how to perform the view analysis. The changes clarify that the sightline is used for both the building height and the bulk analyses, and that more than one sightline may be required. Finally, minor revisions to the graphic are proposed to add a little bit more clarity. And again, this is all shown in Exhibit 36D. So we'll just jump over to here and read through these changes. So the VPO begins with a subsection called Protected Views. That reads, views protected by this VPO1 are from Coors Boulevard along the segment between Western Trail, Nomads Day Road, and Alameda Boulevard, looking towards the Rio Grande Bosque and the ridgeline of the Sandia Mountains from each viewpoint. So that's specifying the views protected begin at a viewpoint, and you look towards the east towards the mountains and the bosque. This next section shows the definitions that are used in the regulations to ensure compliance with the VPO. The first term is sightlines, and that would read, lines that begin at each viewpoint along Coors Boulevard, looking towards the ridgeline of the Sandia Mountains at a 45-degree angle from the east edge of the roadway. So here's the viewpoint looking away towards the mountains at a 45-degree angle. Number 2, sightlines are required to intersect the highest points of the proposed buildings on the site. If the building is all the same height, a sightline shall begin at the viewpoint at the lowest elevation of Coors Boulevard abutting or nearest to the site that allows the sightline to pass through the building. So this diagram again shows 2 high points of the building. If there were only one high point, we would want, and imagining Coors is descending as it continues north, you would want a viewpoint about right here, so you could draw a 45-degree line going through a portion of the building at the lowest point of the road that's near to that project site. And this diagram will be updated before the final IDO update is finalized. Number 3, the sightline is used as the perspective for the analysis in subsections 36D5A, building height, and 36D5B, building bulk. Multiple sightlines may be required depending on the size of the site and the shape of the buildings. So this basically clarifies we're using these sightlines for 2 of the tests, and also that there may be more than one that's required. It was slightly ambiguous before this change. The next defined term that has an amendment is for the view plane, and this diagram tracks with that definition. A view plane is a horizontal plane 4 feet above the elevation of the east edge of the east driving lane on Coors Boulevard, based on the elevation of the viewpoint for a given sightline, and considering the perspective that would be seen along the sightline, which is that 45-degree angle perspective across the site. Multiple view planes may be required if the elevation of Coors Boulevard varies across the site. So this shows starting at the elevation of Coors, going up 4 feet, and then it's a plane that basically is horizontal to the earth. The next new defined term is for viewpoint. It's something that we showed in some of the illustrations, but it wasn't defined. So this is the way that we're tying together all these different analyses. So a viewpoint is defined as the location that views from Coors Boulevard are protected from, representing the approximate position of a passenger in a vehicle traveling north along Coors Boulevard. A viewpoint is set at the east edge of the east driving lane on Coors and is 4 feet above the elevation of Coors at that location. The viewpoint is the starting point for the sightline. So this text was drawn from the former sector development plan, and really that was the key point of establishing where these protected views would originate. Okay, continuing on, these are the regulations that apply those defined terms. The first one is structure height, bulk, and massing. All developments within the VPO shall meet all of the following requirements. 36D5A, structure height, zone district. If the maximum height allowed by the zone district is lower than what would otherwise be allowed by the height, bulk, and massing regulations, the maximum height of the zone district shall apply. So this text in blue, this is what we realized needed clarifications back in 2019, and we just had to hold on to this until we were able to notify all property owners. Next regulation, D5B, is for structure height view plane. One of the changes is to add titles to each of these three tests to make them a little bit more clear to distinguish between, and so that we can all refer to them by the same defined terms. And structure height would be the test that we're applying, and view plane is the analysis tool that is most significant to that rule. So this rule reads, no more than 1/3 of the height of structures, including building parapets, mechanical equipment, and associated screening, walls, and fences, shall be allowed to penetrate above the view plane as seen along each sight line and as shown in the section diagram below, with the following exceptions. So that's this diagram right here. 1, for low density residential development, a total height of 16 feet is allowed for structures other than walls on a lot where, because of site constraints, any portion of the structure is proposed in a location where the natural grade or finished grade of infrastructure is already installed is less than or equal to 10 feet below the elevation of the east edge of the public right-of-way of Coors Boulevard. 2, for development other than low density residential development, the total height of 20 feet is allowed for structures other than walls on a lot where, because of site constraints, any portion of a structure is proposed in a location where the natural grade or finished grade, if infrastructure is already installed, is less than or equal to 10 feet below the elevation of the east edge of Coors Boulevard. Next test over here, structure bulk, view frame. That's the view frame test. And this image below kind of illustrates that. This one would read, looking from the viewpoint, no more than 50% of the area within any view frame for a property shall be obscured by the bulk of the structures, including walls and fences, placed on the property. No portion of a structure shall extend above the ridgeline of the Sandia Mountains that is visible within any view frame for a property. So the view frame is defined as the elevation, of course, at the bottom. At the top, it's drawn along the highest point of the Sandia ridgeline that you can see within that view frame. The edges are drawn by the edges of the property line. Those form these sides of that view frame. What this new blue text adds back is a regulation from the Coors Corridor Sector Plan that did not allow anything to be taller than the ridgeline or break through this view frame. So that was a really important rule that protected views to the mountains. That was accidentally omitted when the IDO was adopted, and we're very excited to get this rule back in. This last test, building massing, there are no changes to that regulation other than putting a title on it and explaining that your site layout would demonstrate whether your site met this massing standard. And essentially that standard says that the way you lay out your buildings should provide some views through like this to the mountains and the bosque. And also it should locate the taller buildings to the rear of the site so that you're, again, minimizing the impacts to the views. There's two other changes to Coors Boulevard that are not shown within the CPO. The first one is in section 36D5. This is a use standard, and it would be to add a new subsection with text as follows. No height bonuses allowed by table 5.1.2 for workforce housing or structured parking are allowed. And the reason for the change is to remove the bonus height available on major transit corridors that was added in the 2019 annual update. While the VPO1 regulations would prevail over any underlying zoning allowances, this provision makes it explicit that the 12-foot workforce housing bonus is not applicable within CORE's VPO1. There's a little more explanation of this in the Council Services memo and in that presentation. The next change is related into that same section, page 133 of the IDO 36D9. So this would be a new subsection in the parking reductions rules that reads as follows. Parking reductions associated with proximity to major transit are not applicable in CORE's Boulevard VPO1. And the purpose for this is to exempt CORE's Boulevard from reduced parking requirements that are associated with major transit corridors. Reduced parking can result in more intense development patterns that might be contrary to the intentions of the CORE's Boulevard VPO. The next set of changes that apply are the Northwest Mesa Escarpment VPO, and there's a council memo, small area exhibit A, that shows these changes, and I've copied them into this presentation over here. The new text is shown in red, and the purpose of this change is to add a second height restriction sub-area and expand the use-specific standards in proximity to major public open space to both the existing and the proposed height restriction sub-areas in the VPO2 in order to decrease the intensity of development in proximity to the Northwest Mesa Escarpment and the surrounding, that is surrounding the Petrovic National Monument. The revised area does not include Volcano Heights Urban Center, where more intense development is appropriate. See additional explanation in the Council Services memo. There's also related changes in the use-specific standards in subsection 4.3. So these changes would create a new height sub-area 2 within the VPO2 that extends 660 feet beyond the existing height sub-area. It shall not include the Volcano Heights Urban Center. The existing VPO2 height sub-area shall be referenced as VPO2 height restriction sub-area 1. The VPO2 boundary would be revised to include any areas where the proposed VPO2 height restriction sub-area is outside the existing VPO2 boundaries. There are changes to revise subsection 3, 4, and 4, Volcano Mesa CPO 13 to read as follows. Standards in the subsection 14.16.3.4N apply only outside the sub-areas indicated in subsection 14.16.3.6E2 as the Northwest Mesa VPO2 height restriction sub-area 1 and sub-area 2. Move the existing content in 3.6E3 to a new subsection A with the heading VPO2 sub-area 1 and create a new subsection B that reads VPO2 sub-area. Structure height shall not exceed 30 feet as measured from natural grade or the maximum height of the underlying zone district, whichever is lower. The fifth change is to create a new subsection 3.4N5C landscaping as follows and renumber the following subsections. The new text would read, within VPO2 sub-area 1 and 2, a minimum of 25% of the net lot area of each multifamily, mixed-use, or non-residential development shall contain landscaping. I'm going to continue on with these changes to the view protection regulations. This first one is subsection 36E3C2B, and it's shown over here with this diagram that illustrates it. And we would remove the phrase two-story construction that is located and revise it to say structures that are located and designed, which applies this, this criterion to any construction, not just two-story buildings. This is another change that was submitted back in 2019 and needed to be held for this review process to notice property owners. The next change here, we will go back to this previous page. This is related to the council submittal to amend the use specific standards in section 4.3. And so what the change would do is to add the phrase or within VPO2 sub-areas 1 or 2 to any of the use specific standards for the following uses that regulate these uses within 330 feet of major public open space. So this list of uses is either prohibited or it requires a conditional use approval to have any of these uses if it's on a lot that's near to major public open space. And this would add or within one of those view protection sub areas. And the uses include car wash, heavy vehicle sales, rental, fueling, and repair, light vehicle fueling, light vehicle repair, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, natural resource extraction, solid waste convenience center, waste transfer center, warehousing, wholesaling and distribution center, drive-through or drive-up facility. So these are essentially manufacturing, industrial or auto-oriented uses. The reason for the change is to extend use restrictions that currently apply to major public open space to also apply to the existing VPO2 sub-area and the new sub-area to limit the intensity of development in both of the sub-areas. There's also related items we've just covered that revise the Northwest Mesa Escarpment VPO2 in subsection 3.6E. There's additional information in Council Services memo and also the council presentation. The last change here is in section 6.6N. I'll find it over here. This text is for the review and decision criteria for an application for variance to the 15-foot structure height that would apply in the height restrictions area. And it says it shall be approved if it meets the criteria in subsection A above and all of the following. The first one, you must demonstrate hardship. The intent of the view regulations in section 1416.3.6E must be met. The burden is on the applicant to demonstrate that strict adherence to the VPO2 building height regulations would render the lot undevelopable because of physical and/or engineering constraints, e.g., rock outcroppings, street grades, drainage requirements, ADA compliance, utilities design, etc. The reason for this change is that stormwater is not allowed to drain into the Petroglyph National Monument. So building sites need to drain towards the street. Where the streets are already constructed and the street elevations are above the grade of a property, this property often need variances to the 15-foot building height because fill would be needed to ensure that that building pad in the house on the site drains back towards the road. So the next set of changes, they apply to the Volcano Mesa CPO 13. The first one I'm showing here in this presentation because there originally was a proposal to extend an allowance that used to apply to a small portion right here of Volcano Cliffs. These are large lots, and right now they're zoned RA, which is residential agriculture. What this proposal would have done was expanded this rule about cluster development to apply to the whole CPO. And we received a lot of comments that that was not desired, and we did not realize the extent of how much more land that, and how many more properties this rule would apply to. So it did go out in the letters to all the property owners within this boundary. And so we did hear a lot of opposition to that. And so that was another reason that it was removed. But in the Volcano Cliffs sector plan, there was a rule that used to allow, if it was a cluster development, which provides more open space on a site by clustering buildings together, building height could be increased to 26 feet for a maximum of 75% of the building footprint. Whereas in other height restriction areas, it can only be up to 50% of the building footprint can be a second story. Actually, I think that's the whole character protection overlay. Or no, I'm sorry, it is just those two height sub areas. So this was not included. So that's the big X showing it's not included in this application form. But these other three, or rather 4 changes are. So we'll cover those now. The first one is in section 3, 4, and 5C. Actually, it's the second in this table. It's page 112 of the IDO. The change is in a section for residential garage access, and the change would read, on streets designated as a local or a collector, residential garages on corner lots shall be accessed from the side or rear lot line or alley. The text in IDO right now says a side street. We don't have a definition for what a side street is. And if both streets are local streets, it's unclear which would be the side street. So the intent of the change over here is to clarify the intent of the garage setback regulations from the Volcano Cliffs sector plan to require driveway access for corner lots to be from the side of the lot, not the front of the lot. So by saying side or rear lot line, that tells us how to apply the rule more clearly. I'm going to jump back to this first change. I think this is actually shown right here in this height sub area one, but ignoring this subsection right here, what this change does is it revises the first sentence to read as follows. Standards in this subsection 1416.3.4 and 4 apply only outside the sub areas indicated in subsection 1416.3.6 as the Northwest Mesa VPO2 height restriction sub area 1 and sub area 2. So these other building height limitations still apply. The reason for this change is that it's an editorial addition related to the proposal to add a second VPO2 height restriction sub area 2. See a related item for the change to the VPO2 and subsection 3.6E3. There's additional information in the Council Services Memo, Small Areas, and Exhibit A, also in their presentation. So continuing on to this next one, this is subsection 3.4N5C. Actually, I'm not at that one just yet. I'm gonna jump ahead to this one, 3.4N5D2. That's shown in red text over here. So this standard applies to residential garage design and layout. And this one would be revised to read, 3-car garages are only allowed on lots over 55 feet wide, and the third garage shall be set back a minimum of 2 feet from the facade of other garages for any front access garage. And the reason for this change is to clarify that the garage setback only needs to apply to garages that face the street. If a garage has the side oriented towards the street, or if it's accessed from an alley, so then the doors would be facing the rear alley, then there's no reason to set back the third garage, because the intent of this rule is to create a more attractive streetscape. So by turning the garage to the side, it would be less of a prominent feature on the building frontage. Okay, so I am going to go back. There's this new one that's missed. It is, looks like it's in the same section, 3.4N5C, or perhaps it looks like it might be a new subsection that is added before the content about residential garage access. So it looks like this is a new landscaping rule that would read, within VPO 2 sub areas 1 and 2, a minimum of 25% of the net lot area of each multifamily, mixed use, or non-residential development shall contain landscaping. What this change does is it requires more landscaping in the existing VPO 2 sub area and the new proposed sub area 2, which would reduce the scale and intensity of a multifamily, mixed use, or non-residential development. It also reduces the amount of property that an impermeable surface is built on, and thereby reducing runoff, stormwater runoff towards the Petroglyph National Monument. There's more information about this in the Council Services Memo, small areas, and also in the Council presentation. With that, we've gone through all 4 changes to this sub area. No, there's one more, and this is in subsection 512. It's here, 512 H2F, page 345 of the IDO. The change would be to add a new subsection 5 to prohibit electronic signs in the Volcano Mesa CPO 13. And what this does, over here is a clip from the former sector plan, and so it carries forward this electronic sign prohibition that was inadvertently omitted, and it extends it to the entire Volcano Mesa CPO area. In the staff report that's coming out, there is a recommended condition to exclude the Volcano Heights urban center, which is meant to be the most intense development on the west side of the river. And so that's a largely commercial area, and having electronic signs may be more appropriate there. And also there was no prohibition against electronic signs in that sector plan before. So planning staff is supporting a request to remove Volcano Heights urban center from this electronic sign prohibition. There are just a couple more. I believe that we, no, we did get that one. Okay, so then the last change that is not shown in the slideshow is a change to page 378 of the IDO. It's section 64J5. That would be a new subsection in the IDO that talks about agency referral. So when an application is made, this is a section that tells us who we're required to notify in terms of like agency commenters. And so this would read, National Park Service and Open Space Division of City Parks and Recreation Department shall be notified essentially for applications that include development within 660 feet of the Petroglyph National Monument. And this change is needed because the Petroglyph National Monument of the National Park Service requested early notification of development that's near the park boundary, which could impact how the access to the national park is managed. Early notification could improve implementation of the sensitive land standards. The other challenge that Open Space Division and the National Park Service are having is that when notification is made, it goes to the official property owner's legal address, which is the United States government. And so it's really hard to for the local division and the local land managers to find out about it, because these things get mailed to Washington, D.C. So this change would have the city and the applicants notify the National Park Service when these applications came in. With that, I will conclude this presentation and ask that anyone who has questions or comments to please reach out to me. I'm Carrie Barkhurst. Here's my email address, kcbarkhurst@cabq.gov. We are in the process of reviewing these at the Environmental Planning Commission in January, and after that they will go to the Land Use Planning and Zoning Subcommittee of City Council, commonly referred to as LUPS. So that's another set of hearings, and then it'll go on to full council for review and decision after that. And Here's a few other resources to an interactive IDO. So that's the adopted zoning regulations. Here's a map that shows all of these small mapped areas and where they apply. Here's a link to the comprehensive plan, other resources and forums and application information on the planning department's main webpage, and then also the city's project webpage for abc-zone.com that has the most information about the review and approval process for the IDO annual update. Also, we're beginning with the community planning area assessment process. So visit that webpage to find out what's the next big thing that long range planning is working on. So if you do have comments or questions, feel free to reach out to me, and all of this is posted on this project webpage. And thanks for listening tonight.